Last of Us, you actually play as Joel in a post-pandemic world that's been essentially devastated by an infection. The infection is, turns everyone into a zombie-esque state. They're not really living dead per se, they're just infected. And the infection takes a form of cordyceps, which is a fungal infection. And you can essentially be either bitten by this by one of the people who are infected in this state, or you can actually become infected through spores. Through either way, it essentially destroys your mind and becomes more or less a zombie-esque creature, as I've stated. In the video game, the main goal is to actually escort Ellie from one location to the next in an effort to cure or eliminate the infection. This video game also accurately depicts people of different sexual orientations without relying upon stereotypes. For most video games, they rely on stereotypes for depicting most people of different sexual orientations, be they gay, straight, bisexual, what have you. It's actually kind of refreshing to see people of different racial or different sexual orientations actually appropriately represented within the video game itself. You don't see proper representation of people within different social or societal groups within video games as a whole. So that is something I have to give Naughty Dog a big pat on the back for. I mean, that's equality is something rarely seen within the video game genre as is. It's kind of seen as a whole, this is our kind of space kind of thing. You saw that kind of huge blowout with Mass Effect. Well, Mass Effect 3 in particular. So, on top of that, this is the societal things aside, it's also a really good game. The overall aesthetic is good. I have to stop saying graphics because aesthetic is really the key word. Is the overall art form to which enveloped the video game. The controls, the crafting system. The crafting system complements this game immeasurably. It has med kits, it has smoke bombs, it has nail bombs, it has improved melee weapons and shivs, and most of the materials to which you use to make these items are shared in between the list. For example, the items that you use to craft a med kit are the same ones that you use to craft a Molotov cocktail. This game just is extremely amazing. However, it does not get everything right. But before I go into what it doesn't get wrong, what it gets wrong, let me say one more thing that it gets right. It might seem like at first on top like an overly escort mission, but Ellie, the character to whom you escort, is actually proficient in combat. It's not like you're trying to guard the bullet sponge, and trying to get it from point A to point B without the character dying. No, that's not the case. This character can stab enemies that are trying to shoot you or beat you up. The character can take a firearm and actually go into combat with the character and actually play as a support role rather than just an escort role. It's not your traditional escort mission, which is the reason to which I actually like this game. Now, having said all that, it still does not get everything perfect. There are problems within the game itself, but the few problems it has are few and far between, so they don't really ruin the overall experience. However, it's not the video game that everyone claims it to be. It didn't ascend from heaven and say, here's the video game. It is better than Halo, but it's still not perfect. And I think if it were to ever change or fix or even remove some of these problems, then it would be perfect, but unfortunately it's not. The game's two problems that I've actually kind of noticed for myself is, well, let me attack the smaller of the two issues first. it's this whole horse bit of the video game. I'm not going to go into specifics of why you're playing a character riding a horse, but without going into too many spoilers, eventually you do get a horse. This is the only part of the video game that controls suck. They're just downright terrible. For a game that has controls as smooth as this has to be the complete low point of the whole video game. If it weren't for another problem that was, well, another few other problems that are overshadowing this one, but control wise, this is completely a nightmare. This is the only part of playing the video game that is completely torturous. If they had turned this into a cutscene or whatever, or completely cut it out of the video game, I would have never even brought it up, but here we are. So this is one of those few things where it would have served better as a cutscene. Before this particular bit of the video game, I kept wondering why they didn't have any vehicle sections or anything like that, and I was like, and then after I got to this, I was like, oh, this is why. Because it's this bad if they put in a vehicle section. uh, Whoever handled this was asleep at the wheel, so I have to honestly say, oof. Now, let's talk about video game design just for a wee little bit here. I'm no video game editor. I've made 0 video games uh, so far, and the best I've ever personally achieved is maybe coming up with a few ideas that could be thrown at editors that make the games, but they have ideas of their own. They probably wouldn't even want my own, so the point is moot for that. So, suffice it to say, I'm not qualified to really make a video game. Having said that, the one thing I do know about video games is that DLC should, if by any means that you ever include it, should be something that's extra, that's not really included into the main story. Uh, think something like the Elder Scrolls series or Fallout series or something to that extent, where it's not going to affect the main video game experience one way or the other. It's something that's extra. It's add-on. It's not necessary. But the instant that you include any of this, oh, it's part of the story kind of crap, is when you have essentially bad DLC, which goes to the point of the scourge of the video game industry. This game has DLC. Now, the biggest issue I draw with the DLC is that it's kind of hinted at and mentioned to within the main story of the game once or twice, depending on your own actions. At a minimum of once for anyone's playthrough, and at least twice for anyone that is really looking into every item and every artifact and everything that can possibly be looked at and picked up at. So I I kind of hate DLC as a standard. It's kind of my default. Having said that, I've seen good DLC. DLC for like Fallout 3 is probably the best example of DLC I've ever seen that was good. DLC that isn't referenced in the main game at all. As the instant that you make it part of the game, you kind of make gamers feel that they essentially are missing something. It's having that Prothean DLC in Mass Effect 3. It's having characters that are downloadable only in a character rich story like Mass Effect 2. It's really that oh, it's part of the game but it's DLC feeling. It rubs me the wrong way. It makes it feel like you're essentially just kind of bullying the customer for cash. I wouldn't have minded this DLC at all had there been 0 reference to it. you know, or if they had included it within the game purchase itself. If they had done either one, I would have been completely fine with it. Now, I understand in the PlayStation 4 version, that's already included, so this is a clear complaint for anyone that has the PlayStation 3 version. So if you have the PlayStation 4 version, this is completely invalid complaint. But if you have the PlayStation 3 version, it's valid. Now, I consider this kind of a major screw up, but something that they've amended in their remastered version. But really, you have to pay like $500 for a new system in order for this not to be an issue anymore. And then you have to deal with the many issues of a PlayStation 4 in order just to actually get it switched over to something more compatible with your own capturing devices and everything else. From an editing standpoint, it's a nightmare. And it's expensive, so you have to go through a whole ton of expenses just to essentially fix a problem that Naughty Dog actually brought up for themselves. So, yeah. Oh, great. Just realized it has multiplayer. Alright, now here's the part of this that I just don't like. It's multiplayer. And Last of Us suffers from all things multiplayer, including long loading scenes. I'm not even going to slow down this loading scene. It's just going to keep going and going and going. It also includes a whole bunch of options to modify an emblem that hardly anyone is going to see. So you get tons and tons of options on emblems which hardly anyone will pay any attention to. And this video is sped up just to show you how many options you have. Pointless options, too. Oh, where to begin? Where to begin about how horrible multiplayer experience is? Well, just like any multiplayer experience, you essentially have to deal with, how should I put this? Weapons you have to purchase. And I mean with finances, with cash, with money that you put onto your PlayStation Network account. And then they have challenges that are associated with this, even if you did not purchase the weapons. Really, this is like the only bit of it that I feel is really shaking you down for cash is the multiplayer. If they sold it as a separate game, I wouldn't be bitching and complaining about this. But also, it took resources away from the actual game. And asking people to pay for extra money for a shotgun or an assault rifle or a handgun or anything like that is just absurd. It's it's nuts. I have no problem with developers adding new features for their online games, but as long as they make them free, like Minecraft does. Minecraft completely adds more and more stuff, but they don't charge anyone past the initial purchase of the video game, which I'm fine with. Uh, that'll have that's not quite a shakedown for cash, but asking for like $5 for a handgun or an assault rifle is nuts. And some of these prices are like $6 for a hat. No, they're just stupid. Ugh. Oh, and you have to put up with all kinds of stupid online crap. It takes forever to get into a match. When you finally get into a match, you have to deal with all the online stupidity from people. I mean, it's really not worth having the chat on unless you're in a party. If you're in a party with a group, and fine, have the chat on. If you're not, then don't. And you have to deal with absurd loading times. It takes twice as long to load an online match as it does to load the actual game on single player. I'm not even going to slow this down because the loading thing is absurd. And they've never been able to fix that in any online game. Ever. It's, it's atrociously long. And that's if you don't get dropped, that's if you don't lose your connection or anything else. See, I'm finally getting into the game. Now, the thing that's mandatory for any type of online game is that you go in the privacy mode, you make it so that unknown players cannot send you emails because it's just going to be mean and spiteful, and then you mute all the players so that you don't have a 9 year old giving you a serenade of fucking Justin Bieber at your ass in full volume. All of this is just to make it playable. And because of this, all online games will always suffer um, for my score. If you have an online feature, it's going to go down. I mean, there's no way to avoid it. And here's another thing that The Last of Us screwed up in their multiplayer. In the single player, the two biggest factions that are most important to the story, without giving away too much, are the Fireflies and the military. In the multiplayer, you can play as the Fireflies or as the Hunters. I mean, granted, the Hunters were important as far as being cannon fodder, but as important as going for story, not really. And in a story heavy game, no. And they had plenty of room to actually add more story in it. Matter of fact, the format for the game on the multiplayer is nearly perfect for additional story for the military. Yet they didn't add it. Oh, they had a chance to make the multiplayer somewhat bearable, and they couldn't, and they didn't do it. Additionally, no video game can ever compensate for the fact that eventually the online multiplayer will become a ghost town. Doesn't matter what system, what game it is, doesn't matter how popular it is. I don't care if it has Halo in the title. Eventually, the online servers will become a ghost town. Aside from that, I cannot support online multiplayer. Now, LAN parties where you go to like one location, have several systems interlinked, and where you can turn into essentially a social gathering. I don't have a problem with that because then you're just hanging out with your buddies. Um, that's fine. I'm more in favor of LAN parties than I am of online gaming because for the reason being that LAN parties are just essentially you hanging out with your buddies. Now, if it weren't for the fact that it were so inconvenient for me, I would actually do it myself. People I know live essentially too far away, and most of the people I know aren't online gamers either. So it makes the whole thing of online gaming irrelevant, you know? At least for me personally. Aside from my own personal biases against multiplayer, which I have numerous of, it's if you really want to enjoy that multiplayer experience after the game is essentially dead, which I have games where I want to play the online multiplayer where there is no community anymore, you can't. I mean, it's complete downer when you're essentially playing a game with an expiration date. Video games should not be treated like a gallon of fucking milk. So for the first time ever, I have a three-way split decision for this. If you're playing it on the PlayStation 4 for single player and for Left Behind, it's obviously a buy. But that's so long as you have zero intention of playing the multiplayer. I mean, none. Ugh. Yeah, it's best on single player only. Now, if you're buying this on PlayStation 3, then it's a rent. And it's a rent for the reason being that for the PlayStation 3, you have to purchase the Left Behind DLC separately. I know that there's a Game of the Year version coming out that might have the DLC that on it, and then it would be equivalent to the PlayStation 4 version because I don't care about that stupid graphics thing. But aside from that, it's a rent for the PlayStation 3. And if you're getting the multiplayer or planning on using the multiplayer at all, then it's a burn. I hate to do this to such a good game, but if you're ever going to use the multiplayer, just no. It drags the whole game down. In my opinion, they shouldn't have wasted any of the resources on the multiplayer. It's, at best, it's just a cash grab. And that's all I can really say about it.